Hello and welcome to SPINALpedia's Disability Employment Success Stories. My name is Tiffany Carlson and I'm the Executive Director of SPINALpedia.com. And today we are joined by Harsh Thakkar. He is from Maryland and we are super excited to have him on. So hey, Harsh, how are you? Thank you for
Hey,
coming on.
thank you for having me. I'm excited to be a part of this.
This is cool. I know. It's always great to have people on from my face. I've always keep saying this, but I've known you for a while online, so this is always fun to see you and talk to people on video chat. So this is cool. So let's kind of start out by talking about your disability. I know you have a spinal cord injury, so let's start with that if you don't mind. How did your injury happen?
No, not at all. So I got injured in 2005, actually due to a gunshot wound.
Okay.
And so I became a T12L1 incomplete paraplegic.
Okay.
And so, yeah, my injury level is that, and that was basically an
How old?
unfortunate string of events. I was
How old?
20.
You were 20. Wow.
Yeah.
So you were like at the kind of prime of your beginning your adult life. What were you? Were you in college or was it were you what was your kind of what like I guess like road were you on at the time?
Yeah, so at that time, time of my injury, I was basically in college, attending the University of Maryland in Baltimore,
Okay.
and yeah, I was on a path of a college career. At that time, I was a business admin major,
Okay.
and as you can imagine, and as many other people can, life got twisted upside down a little bit, and so just trying to, once that happened, tried to figure out a new outlet or new outlets to kind of live my life in a positive manner.
Wow. So you were injured at 20. What year of college were you? Sophomore?
Yeah, yep. I
Okay.
was I was my it was my second semester in sophomore year. Yep.
Wow. So how long did it take you to kind of get back to school after your injury?
It took me about a year before I started taking some online classes, which
Okay.
was my first attempt to like get back in. That first year, I spent majority of the time doing, doing therapy. That's where most of my time was vested into.
Hmm.
And about a year after injury, I started having to, not started having to, but I wanted to start exploring different options of like what I was going to be able to do now.
Right. Where did you think I wanted to go back to the same like degree in school? Did you return to the very same thing you were doing before?
Initially, yes. So when
Okay.
I started taking online classes again, I definitely was still in the same major and
Okay.
still trying to figure out again different avenues in the same pathway.
Right. So how did that go? Did I kind of wanted to ask too, did you get any state vocational support help going back to school?
Yeah, so initially, as a Maryland resident, I went through the Department of Rehabilitative Services,
Okay.
DOORS.
Yeah.
I had a case manager there that was kind of helping me figure out my life path again, going back to college and figuring out what that was going to be like.
Yeah.
So I did use some of their vocational services,
Cool.
just in terms of figuring out what like tuition reimbursement, things
Right.
like that, basically entailed of.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so that was kind of the only service at that time that I
Okay.
used.
So you went back to college and I guess you graduated on time and everything?
On time is it's kind of a vague aspect
Okay.
of it. It took me a little bit of time to graduate college post injury.
Yeah.
So I started taking like very bare minimum online classes. And
Okay.
then actually adaptive sports is what got me to further my college career a little bit.
Okay.
Because then I stopped doing online classes to attend the University of Edinburgh in
Oh,
Pennsylvania,
cool.
where I got a chance to play wheelchair basketball
Oh.
collegiately, and then that's where my path in terms of my my major kind of shifted a little bit there once I
Okay.
got a broader sense of what I was actually more interested and passionate about.
Cool. So I'm guessing you switched your major to what?
So I switched my major to communication and sociology,
Okay.
and so I graduated with a double major in communication and sociology.
All right. Wow. So I thought maybe you were going to say something athletic since you discovered that.
No,
Mhm.
I did look at like even on like the business admin end, I started looking at like business and sports management and things like that.
Yeah.
But I had a really unique professor, both for communication and sociology, my two elective classes that I had taken my first semester there,
Okay.
and they kind of shifted my perspective. And I found that that's kind of where my brain was geared towards
Yeah.
those two realms a little bit. That's kind of how a lot of my problem solving, a lot of my thinking was based on like some of those values that I was taught in those classes.
Awesome. Wow. That's so okay, when you graduated then, what was like your idea for your first job? Tell us about it.
Yeah, so actually I do want to add a little disclaimer. I didn't graduate from Edinburgh University.
Okay.
I actually had to come back home due to some medical complications. I had developed a pressure sore that just wouldn't heal.
Yeah.
So that's why that aspect of graduating on time was a little vague.
Yeah, it sucks. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. And as a
Mhm.
lot of people with disability face secondary complications, and
Ugh.
so
Yeah. Hmm.
unfortunately that happened to be my complication at the time. So I
Yeah.
had to take another year off.
Oh man.
Had to come back home to Maryland, and then ended up graduating from University of Maryland
Okay.
with my dual degree.
Cool. Okay. Well,
And
that's all right. It took you an extra year, but at least you got it.
yeah, for sure. And while I was completing that, my major and my degree, I wasn't very sure initially what I wanted to do with it.
Hmm.
I was looking at a lot of like marketing and public relations job initially when I first graduated,
Hmm.
um, because I didn't mind public speaking. I didn't mind being like the center focus when it came to like speaking engagements and things like that.
Okay.
So I was kind of looking at those as my first approaches.
Cool. Cool.
And what ended up happening
Yeah.
was that I was a volunteer at the National Rehab Hospital in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
I volunteered as a peer mentor. And in that volunteer base, I kind of developed some relationships with a lot of therapists and a lot of people at MedStar NRH. And so that's where I'm currently employed at
Oh,
and
cool.
have been employed for the past 5 years.
Oh, so that's a good tip. So you started out as a volunteer.
Yeah, I did. And I ended up actually getting some contract-based jobs,
Yeah. Mhm.
working in athletics, actually. I was working prior to this, I was working as a contractor for the Wounded Warrior Program or a Wounded
Cool.
Transition Battalion.
Sweet.
For the Army. So that again, like broadened, for me, it was all about broadening my scope of what I thought I would be able to do.
Mhm.
And so being a contractor for the Army gave me like a different scope of what's out there.
So what kind of job do you do for that? Like, oh, you say contractor. What did you do in your job for that kind of
Yeah,
position?
so I was actually an adaptive sports consultant for them. And so what I did was I helped them start a lot of programming at Fort Belvoir in Virginia, getting their wounded transition battalion more acclimated and aware of adaptive sports as a whole.
Ah, cool.
Yeah,
That
so
must
it was basically taking like life experiences and finding a way to develop a program
be fun.
because I had
Mhm.
participated in adaptive sports. So I was kind of aware of what criteria and what kinds of people would be best fit for that. But for that consulting position, it was kind of like just getting those individuals that had suffered either traumatic injuries, PTSD, whatever it may have been,
Mhm.
getting them to still understand that there was a scope of life beyond that point. So it
That's
took a lot of time to just encourage a lot of them to participate in those things.
oh man, you sound like you're good at. I bet you're good at that.
Yeah, no, it definitely brought out some of the skill sets that I had learned on like the communication end
Yeah.
and just understanding people as a whole.
So, can I ask what you do for your main job then over at the rehabilitation hospital?
Yeah, so I'm actually a programming coordinator now.
Okay.
I coordinate two different programs. One is a thriving adaptive fitness program where we get over 100 people with varying neurological disabilities and get them active and into fitness and different activities where basically they get to come to the rehab hospital. And now we have a couple of different partnering sites where we do different forms of adaptive fitness for them.
Fun.
So that's one of the programs. And then the second program is basically like a community reentry program,
Okay.
which includes like some peer mentoring, some resource sharing, and then just some like guidance-based things where, again, it goes back to highlighting human potential and figuring out how people can still, thrive in their lives and not just be isolated.
That's a cool job. You have a very cool job. That would be fun to get paid to do that. So
Yeah,
that
no,
sounds fun.
and that was, again, it goes back to that aspect of volunteering.
Yeah.
I volunteered kind of doing part of that, and then as I learned some of the further skill sets for it, got some training for what kinds of things people actually require. It's kind of like I'm living my life through someone else's eyes or someone else's eyes or living through my experiences.
Yeah.
And so it's actually super rewarding to be able to do what I do.
That's great. So, okay, next question. Do you receive any reasonable accommodations at work, and how do they help you perform in your position?
So I'm really thankful that I work at a rehab hospital.
Yeah.
That just with that being said, they're already aware of what kinds of things I was going to need. Luckily, I am a very high functioning para, so I didn't need a great deal of accommodations. But even little things like if certain doors that I had to get into for like staff offices or different rooms in the building, they basically eased the tension on the doors, and so the doors became easier to open. Not all doors to staff rooms and things like that have like the accessible button for me to get into, but just something as simple as like making the doors lighter made a huge difference. And then they provided me with a desk space that was kind of big enough for me if I wanted to transfer into an office chair, because sometimes you get tired of sitting in your wheelchair all day. So they offered me a big enough space around my desk where I could kind of maneuver my chair and use like other things if I need to as well.
All right. So did you ask for all this, all these accommodations, and did you have any advice on doing this?
So again, it goes back to some of it I did have to ask for in terms of like reasonable desk space and things that I would be able to like maneuver better in. And I just took the basic, like just went to HR, and we have a couple of different reasonable accommodation forms that I had to fill out.
Oh, okay, cool.
And so they basically allowed me to, they have a process of evaluating what my needs would be when it came to that.
Nice.
And as far as like the doors and things like that, they kind of took it upon themselves and realized that they had a staff member that needed some kind of assistance. And so they kind of took that upon themselves. They put like a little window cutout on doors where you can see people coming in and out now, which I think is like a big aspect of it. Whereas like people used to like I used to run into people because I'm going into an office space too fast.
Yeah, it happens.
For sure.
That's funny. Okay, so what do you like most about your job and being employed?
What I like most about my job in itself is like the rewarding components of it is being able to interact with someone that's newly been injured or diagnosed with something, and being able to shed light on the process of it being, first of all, it being a long process of recovery, and then and at the same time finding this evolutionary period of just disabilities in general, where I don't, again, like when I reflect back 13 years ago now, when I first got injured, I feel old saying that like I didn't have these accommodations, or these resources or these things that they have now. So to be able to shed some light on people that think that they should automatically receive something without advocating for it.
Yeah.
Being able to shed some light on that end, I think,
That's
is a
great.
really promising aspect of it.
That's cool that you can do that for your job, for sure.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
for sure.
okay, so why do you think being employed with a disability is important?
Why is being employed in general important? Is my initial question to that. But I do think it's a particularly um, I don't know, something that touches me a little differently when we're talking about people being employed with disabilities, because a lot of stigmas, right? Like, so you break a lot of stigmas in itself of people being employed, people being contributing members to society.
Yep.
When you ask for accommodations and you say you pay taxes for those accommodations, sometimes some people listen to you a little more in depthly, because at the end of the day, the green money that people, basically hunt after all the time, that's the bottom line for a lot of different entities. And
Yep.
so I think not just based on the fact that I'm a taxpayer and I can ask for things, but at the same time, the stigma. So, like, I've had plenty of people, even in the rehab hospital, patients that'll come up to me and be like, "Oh, you actually work here," because there have been plenty of people that have asked me what's my room number.
Wow.
Uh,
Yeah.
so again, so like we're talking about within a rehab setting,
Yeah.
like that in itself, if that's the stigma in a place that's supposed to be fully inclusive of all, if we have people in here that have these stigmas, then I can't even imagine some of the stigmas that people go through when we're talking about private institutions,
Oh yeah.
trying to get into those. And so breaking down barriers, breaking down stigmas, I think is one of the most important aspects of someone with a disability being employed. And then secondly, I think it goes back to the aspect of having enough resources and having enough things where you can be independent. I think having a job not only teaches you skill sets for the job itself,
Yep.
but it teaches you life skills of how to interact with people when either you don't get along with them, or how to interact with them professionally when you're friends with them. Just all of these different components that I think employment as a whole kind of expands on someone's ability to understand that, it's not just about you.
That's a good insight. I like that. That's great. So, okay, last question. What advice would you give to people with disabilities who are interested in working?
I have a couple of things, but definitely find your passion. I think it makes any job easier when you have something vested in it, when you feel strongly about whatever it is that you're doing, when you have some kind of a direction or a purpose. So that would definitely be number one. Number two would be starting off small, is just basically understanding that not all jobs will lead right to your career path. Not all jobs will be the highest paying job that you're going to get right from the beginning. And lastly, it would just be to basically take your time and actually carefully think out the process, because when people are younger trying to establish themselves, whether it's in a career path or a college, not everyone always thinks about the bigger picture. And so I think if people take adequate enough time to think about what their job may mean to them, but what their job may mean to their family or friends, whatever it may be, just taking your time to like actually figure out if what you're doing or the path that you're on is actually the one that you want to be on.
It's good advice. Yeah, because I think when you have a disability or a spinal cord injury, I think life, it's a bit, life, it feels more precious than it is. So you kind of want to make sure you're spending your time in a way that makes you happy, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And a lot of people get focused and honed in on the aspect of, especially those that worked more blue collar jobs and things like that.
Right.
They don't know exactly what their new path could be. And so
it's hard.
that's not an issue that I see able-bodied people who are making career changes. That's not something you see from them.
Yeah.
Whereas they're like, oh, I won't be able to do X, Y, and Z anymore, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So their idea of a shift in a career or a change in a career, I think, comes from a different aspect of understanding. Whereas someone who's had a traumatic injury or a new diagnosis, I think it's harder for them to understand that
Yeah.
their brain was the one that was working just as much as their body was.
Yeah, and they can transition. I think some people who are blue collar are definitely afraid to do that transition. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
So, but you've given us some really good advice. I could keep talking to you, but unfortunately, I probably should stop it here. So, but thank you, Harsh, so much for sharing your journey with us, your employment journey. I know it'll help a lot of people out there who are watching. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I encourage everyone who needs additional advice to reach out and just kind of make sure that, you know, there are people out here who've been through what they've been through, and
Yeah.
it can be done.
Definitely. You're great. I don't want to say you're inspiration because I think that word's cheesy, but I'm gonna say you're a rock star. How about that?
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. You as
All right.
well.
All right. Well, I'll see you later. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks a lot. Have a good one.
Yeah. Bye.